Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Eden Maybon of LightCycleAstrology.com. Welcome back to the channel, friends. Today we are taking a look at the lunar eclipse that is coming in the sign of Scorpio at the end of the week here on Friday, May the 5th. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do some horoscopes for all 12 rising signs. So we're going to take a look at some house topics and plug this eclipse into your birth chart to try to figure out or to get like a skeleton frame of maybe what kinds of topics are being eclipsed. And of course, because this is a lunar eclipse, this is actually happening at the time of a full moon. So we tend to think of full moons as the culmination of something. So this is going to be a moment or an eclipse that deals with what has been leading towards some kind of culmination that may be coming to an end or maybe coming to some kind of resolution or completion. That's typically the general broad meaning that we give lunar eclipses, is a culmination or a door that is shutting, something coming to an end or resolving. And this is going to pair today with the total solar eclipse that we took a look at about 2 weeks ago in the sign of Aries, that actually crossed into the sign of Taurus as it was happening. But that'll give us a broad general meaning. We had a solar eclipse opposite to the place that we're having a lunar eclipse now. So we're going to plug those two houses into the birth natal chart and take a look at potential topics that could be relating to these eclipses. We're also going to take a look at the house that the fallen Mars is in. And the reason we're doing that is because the eclipse is being hosted by a fallen Mars in the sign of Cancer. So Scorpio is the sign that is the domicile or rulership or host of a Mars, and this is Mars's water temple that he calls home. And Mars is going through the fall or depression sign right now of Cancer, where he is said to, be fallen on hard times himself. So what do you get when you have an eclipse of the moon, something related to lunar kinds of things, the feminine, women, home, family, nurturing, things that bring us together or cause an emotional connection? What do you have when those things are being eclipsed in the sign of the moon's depression or fall, being hosted by a planet that is in fall himself? That's a pretty potent and powerful thing to try to consider. But we're going to do just that. We're going to try to consider what all of this means. Now, I want to say at the outset, there is something called astrology anxiety. I don't want to lead anybody into some kind of astrology paranoia or anxiety, because that isn't really what astrology is used for. The ancient astrologers looked at and used and practiced astrology so that there were things that if there was something that you could change or control or get better at, you would try to make those efforts. And if there was things that you couldn't control and was outside of your control, those things were meant to just be meditated upon and ultimately accepted as things that we can't control. A lot of things that we deal with in life are things that we just have absolutely no control over. And one of the interesting things that this connects to with lunar eclipses is the moon has always been a symbol of the waxing and waning of fate or fortune. It is that connection we have to the material realm that is impermanent. Things are born in material form. They exist for a while, to go through change, and then they become withered and decayed by the forces of nature themselves, until ultimately they have to renounce, and spirit or soul leaves and transmutes and goes somewhere else. Some believe it goes into a new material form. But whatever beliefs we hold about that, we are very much subject to the forces of the material world or cosmic realm, as it were. And that's what the moon represents, or part of what the moon represents as an archetype, is that fluctuation of impermanence. That was derived a long time ago by the ancient astrologers, who looked at the moon and realized that, first of all, it was really, really fast. It was always moving. It was always traveling. It was one of the fastest traveling planets. But not only that, its face changed every, couple of days, right? It went from being dark to having a crescent to, being half illuminated and so on and so forth. So they noticed that the moon seemed to reflect the impermanent nature of reality. So it came to represent this kind of impermanence in the world. And impermanence has always been related to the concept of fate or fortune. And those two words have many, many meanings. A lot of people would define them in different terms or have different ideas about what they believe about those. But at the end of the day, what we're getting at is there is a huge section of life that we deal with as living beings that have almost no control about a lot of things. So that's what the moon represents. And when the moon is coming to a culmination, when it's waxing and the light is becoming pregnant and full on the face, and that light is blotted out for a moment, the omen that we take from that, this is during the stage where the light gets eclipsed at the part of the cycle where we're building something up. And then that building comes to a culmination. The symbolism here is that something we've been building or something we've been working towards or something that has been reaching a fullness or a culmination is being shut down, blocked out. The light is being killed for a moment. There's some twist of fate or fortune beyond our control that has to do with just being subject to the forces of material nature that, just are things beyond our control. Things like car accidents or, injuries. So that's why I don't want to lead anybody to anxiety, because we're using language like car accidents and injuries, but these are things that, we do have things happen to us during life that are outside of our control and are just kind of, as they would say in Hawaii, shitty. They're just things that just, you can't stop them. You can't change them. There's nothing you could have done to be forewarned about them. These are just those things that happen that we can't do anything about. And well, okay, we can do one thing about them. And this is what the ancients taught. The ancient astrologers were teaching that the thing that you can do about the things that you cannot do anything about is to simply accept that there are things you can't do anything about. And when they happen to you, you just do your best to, muddle through whatever it is that you're dealing with as best you can. And that spirit of getting through that is really all you really have control over. So this is kind of a long introduction into this eclipse, but I just wanted to hit upon a couple of things. First of all, the anxiety of astrology can happen to people that are curious or interested or practicing or listening to astrology content. And we just have to remember that that wasn't the intentions of the ancient astrologers that created astrology in the first place. Their intentions were very much to in line with like Stoicism, to bring us to a place of acceptance for things that are, outside of our control, and to give us, I guess, moral guidance for the things that we can maybe work on and improve. So I just want to say that at the outset, this is some of this language is going to sound scary. We're going to plug these into the house systems, but that isn't the intention. So most of the time, you're not going to get the worst case scenario, but in order for me to describe the language of the houses or the keywords for the houses and how I put the delineations together, a lot of times you come up with examples that sound extreme, and I don't mean them to be. You sort of have to take kind of the essence or the archetypal characteristic and, tone it down and meditate on what could it be that is something like that in your life that seems like it's getting somewhere close to those topics or those types of themes, and usually dial it down. So if we use words like death or breakup or car accident, it can be those things. It can, but it's our lives generally, don't go through that much difficulty. If you listened literally to every video that I make and every horoscope video, you thought the worst case thing, your life would be just almost unbearable, So most of the time it's not the worst case scenario, But there are times when it is. And we do have those times, a couple of times during our life. Let's go ahead and get into this particular lunar eclipse in the sign of Scorpio. And of course, before we do, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Leave some comments in the comment section. I would love to hear how you guys experience this eclipse. That really, really helps me out when I get comments, even if I don't have time to respond to everybody, which I do try to respond to as many as I can. But I still really appreciate hearing the feedback, because it's like, oh, okay, I see. I was sort of angling this way and it got within the ballpark. Okay, I see how, they were talking about it, or how they experienced it, and how that could sort of correlate. So that's really helpful. In the future, I would actually like to, I've been toying with the idea of doing live streams where I have one of my friends on, and maybe we can do almost like a call-in show, but it would be maybe through super chats or something like that, where we do like one question, or we engage with a rising sign and we figure out, okay, how is this going? What do we see? So maybe for monthly horoscopes or something like that, that might be fun to do, almost like a call-in show with myself and another astrologer, and we can sort of take super chats and answer astrology questions live for your personal birth chart. That might be something that I could do in the future if I can make that happen. If you guys like that idea, let me know. You can always go to my website, lightcycleastrology.com, if you ever want to get a reading from me, or you want to send me a private message. This is the website I always go to when I want to look at eclipses. So check this out. This is really cool. So this lunar eclipse, there are two bands of shadow that the Earth makes, and this is called a penumbral eclipse, and it is the kind of eclipse that doesn't go into the darkest band of the Earth's shadow. It goes into, I guess, the outer band that is still a shadow of the Earth, but isn't the darkest part of it. So they say that this is going to be the deepest outer band eclipse that we get until 2043. So this Earth shadow that is passing over the moon, the umbral, they call it. And this is happening now. It's got visibility. It's happening really, let me see if I can make this big. This pink area, this is the main part that is, you can see the total eclipse. You can see the whole thing, I guess. And then there's this lighter, almost like blue or teal color, that is where you can see a partial eclipse. So you'll see right off the bat, this is if you're anywhere in China, Southeast Asia, India, Pakistan, I think this is Kazakhstan, Central South Russia, even the South Island of Japan, and of course Australia, Papua New Guinea, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and even southern New Zealand. Is that? Yeah, New Zealand right there. And then, so that's where you can see the total eclipse. And you can see if you're anywhere in Africa, anywhere in Europe almost, except for the British Isles, Sweden, Finland, and a lot of Russia. And then me, even out here in Hawaii, it looks like I can partially see some of the eclipse here. So now one reason why I show you guys where you can see it is because what I was taught is that if your birth chart is in an area that the eclipse is visible, it should affect your birth chart more intensely than it would otherwise. But if you are born somewhere outside of the eclipse visibility, then it's like your birth chart isn't quite as affected by the eclipse. Maybe it goes by unnoticed. So that's one important thing to take a look at when you look at eclipses. And the other thing, of course, is when is it happening? Well, so on this website, timeanddate.com/eclipses, I set my setting over here, my location to Pennsylvania. And so it's East Coast Standard Time here. So in East Coast Standard Time, this eclipse begins May 5th at 11:14 a.m. in the morning, and it peaks out or is maximum at 1:23 p.m. On the May 5th, and then by 3:32, we'll call it p.m., the eclipse is over. So it's about a 4-hour and 18-minute eclipse. That's how long the eclipse is. So you just have to convert that time to where you are. But It doesn't really matter for East Coast time anyway, because you don't see it, but it's still fun just to kind of know, when it's happening. Sometimes I set my alarm to see when things are like transiting in the sky or something, just to take a moment and feel the vibe and see if I can feel anything around me. Okay, so that's the timing of the eclipse. And I want to tell you a little bit about the meaning of lunar eclipses, which I've sort of already done in the intro here. But again, lunar eclipses are about endings, culmination, completion. You could think of it like a shutting door, a door that closes or shuts, the resolution or closure of things. Again, that's because we're talking about the eclipse happening on the light of the moon as the moon is coming to its culminative light at the time of the full moon, right? So this is something that we've been building, we've been working on, something that's been in existence or happening for a while. And then there's this door that shuts, and it is shutting from circumstances or environmental factors. It's usually outside of our control. It's the circumstances that sort of become like the fate or fortune that causes something to become resolved or closed or completed or done, Of course, this is also symbolic of the downfall of lunar things. So sometimes lunar eclipses can be problematic for women, mothers, pregnancies, body, the mind, health, home, family karma, etc. These are all things that are connected to the lunar archetype. So anything connected to the lunar archetype sometimes can go through difficulty when it's being eclipsed like that. Now, one thing that is really interesting here, let's go ahead and pull up the real-time clock so we can take a look at some of the dignities that is happening. So again, we have the eclipse happening in Mars's water feminine nighttime sign here of Scorpio, the dark of the dark time of year seasonally. And Scorpio is ruled by Mars. So we have Mars down here in the sign of the moon, interestingly enough, and we have the moon in the sign of Mars. So, and by the way, there is the moon's node. So you can see, because the moon's node is pretty close to the full moon, that's how you know it's an eclipse, by the way. But anyway, so there is something happening that is called mutual reception, which means that both the moon and Mars are in each other's temples or domiciles. So they have a kind of psychic connection, as it were. Maybe you could think of it that way, but there's some kind of reception between them because they're both in each other's temples or domiciles. Now, they do actually have, on top of that, they have a whole sign trine between them. Mars was said to be in the sign of his fall in Cancer, and the moon is said to be in her fall in the sign of Scorpio. So there's this almost like this trine aspect between them, gives you an indicator that they're helping each other out. It's like they're supporting each other. But what do you get when you have two characters? Let's say you give the moon a character of like a depressed mother or something like that. And let's say you give Mars the torn up war veteran who's, frustrated, has come home and everything is different, and it's hard to reintegrate into like normal life after seeing the horrors of war or something like that, right? But like a warrior that's sort of fallen down a little bit in the sign of Cancer is kind of a characteristic archetype you could make of Mars and Cancer. And let's say that they're both helping each other out. So it's like they're both, hanging out and swapping stories and commiserating together. That's a little bit of the kind of energy that you get with this particular lunar eclipse, because you have a dispositor that has reception. They have mutual reception. They have whole sign reception. So that's kind of one interesting thing about this eclipse right off the bat. Before we get to the horoscopes, I wanted to share one last thing here on Rhetorius the Egyptian. So this is the translation I have by James Holden. What does Rhetorius the Egyptian say about planets that are depressed? He goes into that. He explains why each planet is exalted and depressed. And I thought that was really crucial to understand, because we're talking about an eclipse that is happening in the sign of the moon's depression, and it's being hosted by a depressed Mars. So what he talks about is, he says, in which then is the moon exalted here? None is in its fall there. And he's talking about Taurus here. And the moon is in its fall there. none is exalted here. He's talking about Scorpio. So there's an interesting thing with the exaltation and depression of planets in the sign of Taurus and Scorpio. And you'll see why in a second, but these two signs only deal with the moon. One sign is where the moon is exalted in Taurus, and Scorpio is where the moon is depressed. And he says, well, why is that? And he says, well, we say that the moon is the fate of all, and the one that fate exalts, none reduces. So again, we come back to this notion of the moon having this connection to the material realm of fortune and fate, being the fate of all. And what he gets at is during the time of Taurus season, this is the where the spring season is being stabilized after the initial turn into spring out of winter. So Taurus is the stabilization of the new spring light. And it's right there in the middle of spring. Life is, being lifted up. So the fortune is exalted. It's important. It's lifted up. And I think what he's getting at is like, who in the world could stop spring? Well, nobody could stop spring. So he's getting at a philosophical underpinning point of logic that says, there are forces bigger than us that are connected to fate or fortune that, for good or for bad, we can't stop them. We can't change them. Nobody can change them. So nobody can stop the spring, right? Nobody can stop good fortune if the mechanics of the cosmos are bringing those things down the pipeline. So that's, usually, of course, we all want good fortune, right? Nobody ever says, darn it, there's some good fortune coming. It's just my luck, But he goes on to say that we say that the moon is the fate of all, and the one that fate exalts, none reduces. But then he talks about Scorpio here, and he says, and the one that fate makes humble, none is able to exalt. So again, we're talking about the car accident. You can't foresee it. You can't stop it. You can't change it. You can't get up in the morning and say, oh, hold on, let me just wait 5 minutes because in 35 minutes, I'm about to have a car accident. But if I hold on here for 5 minutes, I'll just miss it and everything will work out. Nobody can do that. The one that fate makes humble, none is able to exalt. So again, the moon connected to fate here. And when Rhetorius talks about why is Mars exalted or depressed, he says, again, for what reason is Jupiter exalted here in Cancer? Mars is in its fall there in Cancer, and Mars exalted here in Capricorn, and Jupiter is in its fall there in Capricorn. We say that Jupiter is the ruler of life and of abundance, and Mars is death. Here in Cancer, then does the breath of life increase. There in Cancer is the quality of death in its fall, and here in Capricorn does death increase. There in Capricorn is life in its fall. This one really hit me quite deeply because it's almost sounding like what he's saying is that if you think about summertime, it's like the summertime is not conducive towards things dying. And I thought, well, so if you take a fruit tree and you plant it in Cancer season, it couldn't die? Well, it's not that it couldn't die, maybe what he's saying. I think what he's saying is that it's sure a lot easier to get it to live than it would be if you planted it in Capricorn time of year, in the wintertime. Not that it couldn't, but it's more conducive towards life. What he's saying is that the breath of life increases. So there's an easier time with life, and that isn't connected to death as readily as it would be in the wintertime. So these are seasonal qualities here. It's easier to understand the flip side of this, where he talks about Capricorn, where he says, and there in Capricorn does death increase, then is life in its fall. Yeah, well, I mean, that's pretty easy to see. The dark winter, not much light, it's cold, maybe there's snow, everything's dying, more and more things are falling off the trees. If you wanted to plant something or grow something, good luck with that. The animals are not reproducing at that time. So you get the sense that, there isn't that conducive thing towards life that is helping life along. It's not conducive towards life, right? And so death is sort of exalted up. The way that made a little bit more sense to me on the why is Mars in Cancer side of things is because I was actually looking at my newborn, and she's about 6 weeks old now, and she's doing really well. I hope she continues to do well past this eclipse because both she and I have the eclipse happening in our first house. So if you think you have any kind of anxiety about this eclipse, let me tell you, I'm experiencing probably the worst position for this eclipse to take place in my birth chart in the first house. We'll talk about that here in a second. But if anybody had a good reason to be a little bit worried, it would be somebody that is a Scorpio rising, I would say. So, so far she's doing good. She's getting a little bit gassy. She's having some pains from gas. And I got this weird sliver in my thumb that is becoming infected. So hopefully that's the worst of it. But I was watching her being nursed, and her mom is nursing her, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, Mars is about being independent, right? It wants to get away from home. It wants to go out. It wants to do battle and have courage and take risks and have speed. And reminds me of like Brad Pitt in that movie Troy. Basically, that's the Mars archetype, right? Brad Pitt in Troy. He was Aries, right? Or Aries. Anyway, so I'm thinking of, well, how does my little baby become like Brad Pitt? She's, not trying to be nursed and give me my armor and my sword, right? That's what Mars is all about. Well, she doesn't have that capability at 6 weeks old to have any kind of independence. She's completely dependent on her mother nursing her. If that didn't happen, she wouldn't survive, So interesting. Mars just doesn't do well because there aren't the conditions there that help it to be independent or to sever ties with dependency. It doesn't have a good time there. So that is a little bit about what Rhetorius described for some of these exaltation and impressions of these planets, and a little bit what I got out of it too. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to share and kind of crucial to understand this particular eclipse here. So now let's go ahead and we will pull up the real-time clock finally and take a look at, we're going to place Aries on the ascendant and get into our horoscopes now. We'll take a look at where we see this eclipse falling in based on your rising sign. So we're going to start with Aries here. Now, before I do, though, I did want to tell you kind of an interesting way that I came up with these delineations this time that I thought was kind of interesting is I took one pass at coming up with some delineations for all 12 rising signs, and then I went back and I took another pass at it, but looking at it through a different set of house topics. And so I'll tell you what I did. We had the solar eclipse basically happening across the Aries Taurus cusp here about 2 weeks ago. Broadly speaking, we gave an interpretation for the house that the solar eclipse was opposite to for the moon as being like a door that opens, some door that is, kind of opening up. And then just broadly speaking, we're going to interpret the moon as being connected to the house topics of where it's landing in, where there might be a door that's shutting. So pretty simple. We're taking two houses that are opposite to one another, and we're saying 2 weeks ago, there may have been an omen that says something is opening. And then right now we're saying that something that has been there already might be closing down in that house where the moon is occupying during the eclipse. So pretty simple. So what I did is I went through all 12 rising signs and I delineated for that kind of theme. The door closing in this house, what does that mean for those house topics? How could we see a door closing for these house topics? How could we see a door opening for these house topics, and so forth? Now, what I did after that, though, that was kind of cool, in my opinion, is that instead of just leaving it there, what I did is I also took a look at the same house for the lunar eclipse here of Scorpio, but I wanted to see maybe if there was a tie-in with the dispositor of the eclipse where Mars is in Cancer. So I took a look at the sign of Cancer and Scorpio, and because of this trine aspect that is formed between them, it's as if not only does the moon rely upon Mars as it travels through Mars's sign, but there is this support indicated by this trine aspect between the two signs. So how could the fate or fall of fortune maybe be supported by a fallen Mars in Cancer, in other words? So then I added in some more delineations for these two houses coming together. So that's what I did. Let's go ahead and talk about Aries Rising now. So if you are an Aries Rising, this is showing the eclipse happening in your 8th whole sign house of Scorpio up here. And we recently, of course, had the lunar eclipse across the Aries first house into the second house. And then Mars is in the fourth house. So we're going to pair all of those house topics together and come up with maybe some particular ways in which you could see this eclipse pointing towards something. So for Aries risings, having that solar eclipse potentially open a door in the house of money makes me think that providing for yourself and not needing to rely on others. The eighth house is a place where we rely on others and others rely on us. So if something's beginning in the second house of money, could it indicate that you're able to do something for yourself? And so then you're maybe not so reliant on depending on other people for certain things. So that's one interpretation that struck me as kind of being maybe something that is standing out for this eclipse. A door shutting on a resource you depend on or, from others, right? Could just the interpretation of an eclipse, a lunar eclipse in the eighth house as a standalone interpretation be, child support or any kind of resource that you usually depend on? Could this be a time where that door is shutting? Like for instance, receiving child support and then the child becomes of age and then the payments stop or something like that, right? But this could definitely be a time where, there's some resource that is dependent on that door is shutting. Now, it might be you shutting the door on, for somebody that depends on you. The eighth house has that double thing where you depend on people and they depend on you. And how do you help them? And how do you help? How does everybody help each other? What's the sharing of the resources? How does that play out? Who gets what? All of that could be what is something about that topic. Something could be closing or coming to an end now. So maybe it's you saying, I can't pay it anymore. I got to stop paying this for you. You're going to have to figure out how else you can get support or help with this. Maybe that's something that you have to tell somebody. Now, it could be paying off a debt you owe. Maybe there was something opening in the second house that gave you the ability to pay off debt. So maybe that door closing in the eighth is the debt that is closing out. That would be a pretty positive thing if that were the case. Or something to do with death or inheritance. Of course, the eighth house is connected to death and inheritance. And when we're talking about a lunar eclipse, there is usually the metaphorical meaning of a death. But in the case of an eighth house situation where we're talking about the mortality and fate and fortune, sometimes this is one where we really could see, somebody passing away that has some connection to inheritance or something like that. So that is definitely a possibility with this one, but I don't want to get you anxious because it's usually not going to happen, but we could see that for sure. One fun one is that if you think about, again, the solar eclipse in the second, that may be opening a door, and the second house is related to how do we invest? How do we invest our money? And the eighth house has that sort of connection to life mortality. I wondered if anybody out there who is an Aries rising may be looking into life insurance, an insurance that they pay for themselves, an insurance against death, right? All right, let's go ahead and put Taurus on the ascendant. And now we are going to move we're going to shift a couple of houses clockwise here. So now the lunar eclipse is taking place in the seventh house. And we're going to take a look at the solar eclipse that came across the 12th house, first house cusp a couple of weeks ago. And we're also going to take a look at how Mars might be disposing of the fate or fortune that's happening in the seventh. So that's what we're going to do to draw out some interpretations on some house topics for Taurus rising here. And for Taurus rising, the ending in a legal case or sale, the seventh house, if any Taurus rising has been involved in any kind of legal matter that's been in the courts, this could definitely be a time where that door closes, that case comes to a completion or culmination. But sometimes it can be a sale, like the sale of a house or the sale of something that you've been working on, you've been waiting for, you've been trying to get the money to come through, like escrow and all that kind of stuff. This could be where finally the sale is finalized. The culmination of working something out emotionally with a partner. Scorpio is a very emotional sign, and a lot of the signature of this eclipse has to do with emotions and that underworld Marsy sort of scorpionic either retribution or what's the other word, like cathartic healing, right? Where you get an injury, but then the injury brings a focus on healing the injury. So maybe this is like an emotional thing that you're working out with your partner. You're trying to bring something emotionally to a place of healing or resolution or something like that. I'm trying to stay away from just the low hanging fruit of it's going to be a breakup, a divorce. But of course, we do have breakup, divorce, or the ending of a relationship. Now, I thought that this was interesting because if you think about the eclipse in the first house that happened 2 weeks ago, the solar eclipse, makes me wonder if there isn't a door opening in the house of self, right? Some kind of personal evolution. And if some people that are Taurus risings aren't somehow moving away from certain relationships that they have had, due to the fact that something about them doesn't match the relationship any longer. So that's one thing that I could see for this. Of course, we could have death of a partner. That is something that sometimes happens where we have an eclipse in the seventh house, is our partner could go through struggle with mortality or have a brush with mortality, right? So it's not to say that they might die, but maybe it's like something where your partner gets sick and it's a little bit of a brush with mortality on some level. I wonder if this isn't also the death of single life. I get that because the seventh house has a connection with like pleasure seeking in parties and sort of kind of like hanging out at night after the sun goes down and work is done and there's like leisure and it's sort of fun and pleasure and dates and casual sex. And the seventh house was this connection with with sex, and usually it's with marital sex, but it can be just kind of like that free single life where you're kind of dating and having sex. So I wonder if that eclipse in the first house 2 weeks ago, the solar eclipse, isn't speaking to a change or evolution in you personally, because there is like sort of the end of single life. For instance, like a bachelor party, where that would be a good representation of a lunar eclipse in the seventh house. You have your last hurrah, it's wild and crazy, but now you're married. Like all of that is gone. That fun, pleasure seeking single life is no more. And now that's a good thing, right? It's good to get married and find your person, and not everybody really wants to live like that forever anyway, but some people do mourn that so they can have that kind of lunar eclipse kind of faded quality to it of like, okay, it's done. I'm chained, right, as it were. Okay, so let's go ahead on to, one more thing for Taurus Rising. We have returning home from travel, seventh house connected to travel. So maybe there's a door shutting in traveling. And competition with siblings, that is the one where we pulled in the third house here, where Mars has fallen in the third house. Could there be a sibling issue? And maybe there's something with siblings and partners, or siblings and relationships, or conflict that is happening surrounding the topics of having a conflict with a sibling that is affecting a relationship, or vice versa. There is that for maybe bringing in this Mars in the third house here. Okay, let's go ahead and put Gemini on the ascendant. So now this is going to pull the lunar eclipse into the sixth house. This is a really interesting one. I like this one. And the solar eclipse that happened 2 weeks ago was across the 11th and 12th house cusp. So I'm calling it the 12th house here just for simplicity, but we're looking at a door opening in the 12th house. Very interesting. And a door potentially closing in the sixth house. And we're looking also at the dispositor of fate being this fallen Mars that might have something to do with second house topics of money. So if you are a Gemini rising, a new path towards healing or a new path opens up towards indulgence. So you get a little bit of both here. This 12th house is a tricky place to delineate because you get something new that is happening in the 12th house. So could that be like the 12th house has this connection with hospitals, and that's because you go to a hospital to get better, right? So there could be this connection where there's a way in which we're coming back to our health or coming back to ourself. There's a new way of doing that that might be positive, but there also could be a new way of doing something that is negative, especially because if you're Gemini rising, your 12th house is a Venus ruled house, right? Taurus is ruled by Venus. So Venus likes to indulge in ways in the 12th that can be too much. It's too much of a good thing, or too much sweets, or too much anything that is pleasurable, that turns out to be unhealthy or lead you astray, or lead you into a place that's not so good for you. So there's something potentially about some new way of indulging something, and it's probably connected to something that's pleasurable. And then you have this lunar eclipse happening in the sixth house, and there's a door shutting in the sixth house. And so maybe this is like, one example could be somebody that decides to go on a like Vipassana retreat. Have you guys heard about these, where you go and you meditate for a couple of days and you're not allowed to talk, and it's like a Buddhist Vipassana meditation form of meditating. And I did this in Thailand a lot. But maybe because you're doing this, you don't do the normal service towards health of like daily yoga or something like that. So maybe there's a system of one kind of regimen or health thing that you're doing that comes to an end, and there's almost like something else that's beginning in a different health system that is coming online. So there could be something like that. Or it could be that, let's say, for the sake of indulgence, that, of course, you stop doing the healthy exercise because you're wrapped up in the indulgence. So worst case scenario, like maybe there is a Gemini rising out there that is, going to discover, heroin, right? And of course, this is going to close the door down in the sixth house of health. So that's an extreme example. And I'm sure nobody watching that's going to happen. But there are people that go down that road, and this could be maybe like an extreme version of that, I guess. So something like that. Conflict in the home over money. We're going to bring in the second house here and ask the question, how does Mars in the second in its fall maybe support something happening in the sixth house? So sixth house has to do with conflicts. This is an eclipse happening in fall of the moon. It's an eclipse of the moon, and it's being disposed of by Mars in fall in the moon's sign. So there's these very Marsy. The sixth house was said to be the joy of Mars, where Mars liked to cause conflicts and accidents, injuries, strife, war, disease, sickness, infirmity. It was said that Mars had his joy in the sixth. So you get the moon going through the sixth. It sounds like it's something probably related to the body, but it could be, of course, something in the home or family. Maybe the conflict is having something to do with that money house. There's conflict over money or something like that. Resigning or resolution of service. This could be a moment where, if you're Gemini rising, you say, that's it. I'm done. I'm not serving this anymore. I'm shutting the door on that. I'm going in a new direction, right? So somebody that says, you're going to have to take care of this yourself because I've been doing it a long time and I can't do it anymore, or something like that. But it could be a service to you as well, or it could be a service provided to you by somebody. It could be an employee or a tenant. So if you have employees, this could be a time where you had a great employee and they move on to another job or something like that, right? Bad fortune for a crop you sell, or of a crop you sell. That connection to the second and the sixth place had its connection to growing food, the endless toil of farming. And maybe there's something fallen, or a fate or karma that's sort of down on its luck. So you could get the sense like there's some toil, something you've been working hard on that may go through a hard moment. You've been working really hard on it, and it's like there's this bad luck that just causes it to come to an end. It could be work, right? It could be a job. Definitely could be something like that. Especially if you have one of those sixth house kinds of jobs, like you work in the military, or you work for the government, or you work for any kind of blue collar job. There's a sixth house connection with that as well. So maybe there's a connection back to money. loss of money from an injury or lost work. So yeah, you get the idea here. Okay, let's go ahead and put Cancer on the ascendant now. So this is going to bring in this eclipse into the fifth house of Scorpio fifth house. And that eclipse 2 weeks ago happened from your 10th into your 11th. And then we're going to put Mars in fall in the first. So we're going to sort of combine all of these house topics to delineate for Cancer rising people. And if you're a Cancer rising, I'm wondering, getting the help you need to have children might be for some Cancer rising people out there. Especially you have Mars in the first house. It's like, this could be a time where people that have Mars in the first house, if you're a Cancer, it's like you need a surgery. You need to go have a surgery or something like that. But I wonder with this eclipse in the fifth, that there isn't something where there was the solar eclipse moving into the house of benefactors, the 11th house. There's a door opening of a benefactor that comes along and says, hey, I'm going to help you out. And then there's this door closing in the fifth house. So I wonder if one possibility is just that you're able to get some help if you want to have children, and there's like a new therapy or a new regimen that you can try to have children, something connected to that. Also new opportunities, and no longer home with the kids. So this would be like the the stay-at-home mom that goes back to work, but then isn't spending time with the kids as much anymore because there's some new opportunity out there in the world, right? Having your feelings hurt by one of your children. So of course, this probably happens all the time, but that Mars in the first house, the eclipse in the fifth, you get the sense that it's a little bit like, something, my kid said something to me, and I'm taking it pretty personal, and it's not the run of the mill just thing where kids say stuff that hurts, and it's like, they're kids. This would be one of those things that it's like it's a little bit more hard to get over, because it just feels like it got driven in a little bit far. Maybe there's a conflict with children. You could see, of course, having fights or a conflict with children, of course. And this could be a situation where like a teenager decides they're going to run away from home or something like that. In the extreme, I don't want to make you worried, but in the extreme, I know I ran away from home one time. So my mom had to experience that. Loss or separation of a child. Injuries during recreational activity. Yeah, Mars in the first with an eclipse in the fifth. Could you be out playing soccer and it's like, oh, you twist something and there's the first house Mars and you were out there having fun. There's the fifth house eclipse and the first house Mars. You were out there having fun, doing some recreational fun, and that first house Mars got you. So be careful if you're doing recreational sports, I guess. Personal healing from creativity. I've got a friend who, it's my wife's friend who does art therapy, and very interesting. I don't really know that much about art therapy, but it's kind of interesting. So we got that fifth house connection where could there be something with a therapeutic value coming through for Mars in the first? How is creativity? How is a door in your creative life shutting down that needs something for the first house to heal? This one I'd be really interested in. So if you're a Cancer rising, you can leave me a comment how this eclipse seemed to be showing up for you. That'd be really interesting. All right, let's go ahead and put Leo on the ascendant now. And we're going to take these planets and shift them one to the left. And we're going to get the lunar eclipse happening in your fourth house now if you're a Leo rising. And 2 weeks ago, you had that solar eclipse happen across the 9th and 10th house cusp here, and Mars in your 12th house in fallen Cancer. So that's an interesting combination of house topics that we're going to put together and blend to see maybe what is coming up for Leo ascendant people with this eclipse in the fourth. What is it pointing to? Well, definitely, the fourth house is connected to home and family. We're having an eclipse of the moon, another symbol that is connected to home and family. So this one's definitely probably home and family. You're just going to keep it simple for Leo. But having that solar eclipse take place across your 9th, 10th house axis a couple of weeks ago makes me wonder if there wasn't a new work opportunity that may now keep you from time at home. You're just out there. There's a new door that opened, and so there's a little bit of a closed door at home, or you're just not at home as much, maybe for some reason that you're busy out there in the world. That could definitely be part of this. Having to relocate for work to maybe more of an isolating place. Mars in the 12th. Having a little bit of a difficult time being isolated in the 12th house like that. So maybe this is something to do with leaving your home, right? That eclipse, closing that door of the home. Maybe there's a home that literally the door closes. You're not there anymore for some reason. And maybe you're more isolated where you are now temporarily. And maybe that has something to do with work or something like that. An emotional prisoner. That is Mars in the 12th, right? Maybe there's like an emotional prisoner that is really making home life difficult. Maybe there's something about that Mars in the 12th that is brimming under the surface that is maybe palatable to people in your family or in your home, and it's making things a little bit tense. Family secrets or karma that potentially are doing harm. So kind of the same theme where maybe there's like, the 12th house is connected to the secrets of the family and of family karma, right? So you get this shadowy thing that is happening in the 12th. You get a door closing in the 4th house, and it's like you could see somebody needing to get away because of a secret that is revealed or something like that, that maybe feels hurtful or something. Could be mom and dad get sick. Maybe this is a time where you have to care for your parents a little bit. Family members working at cross purposes to you, or maybe angry with you. A family member that's an enemy. Now you could be the enemy. Maybe it's you that is sort of the family enemy at the moment. That time where you find yourself, it's like all of a sudden you're on the outside and everybody's mad at you, and it's like, how did this get to be like this? Or it could be somebody in the family that seems to be acting like that towards you, right? Making the wrong move that lands you in a hospital or jail. That Mars in the 12th with a lunar eclipse just rings of just, I hope you're careful with your body, with doing anything that is dangerous or shadowy with Mars in the 12th like that, because you get that connection with hospitals and jails with the 12th house, and you get that sense that there's a real strong theme that is connected to the home and the body. So it's like going to go one of two ways. It's either going to be about your body or about your home, and you certainly don't want to end up in a hospital or a jail and have that separation from the home. Spending time alone away from the home to process emotion. Maybe that's more of a positive one here, where you just say, I need to get away and have some peace and quiet so that I can just sort of process something. And that would be, nothing wrong with that, I think. Okay, let's go ahead and put Virgo on the ascendant now, and we are going to move this consortium of planets one house to the left here, where we get now the lunar eclipse taking place in the 3rd house of siblings, of the everyday environment, of the mind, of routines, and the customs and rituals of the nation. And we also had 2 weeks ago, we had the solar eclipse happening across your 8th and into your 9th house cusp here, right on the cusp. The solar eclipse happened. So we're looking at this from the standpoint of maybe a door opening across that 8th, 9th house cusp, and maybe the lunar eclipse representing a door that's closing in the 3rd house, a place of the everyday environment. And then we're also going to bring in, how does Mars as the dispositor of the moon, how does he maybe support what is being closed off by fate or fortune, that maybe pulls in some 11th house kinds of things. Now, maybe none of these connect, or maybe they do, but this could be simultaneously some themes that are all happening at once, or they could be related to each other that are sort of domino, affecting each other. But anyway, if you're Virgo rising, relocating for education or spiritual fulfillment, right? We're having that eclipse that happened 2 weeks ago, the solar eclipse that is representing a door potentially opening in the house of God, right? So there's something maybe about higher education, philosophy, fulfillment, publishing. And then there's something closing in the third house where we generally, are used to being. It's that everyday environment where we're just used to being, in the same places and seeing the same things and going this, on the same daily places that we go to and things like that. So something is closing. It makes me wonder right off the bat, if you are a Virgo rising, is there something changing about that daily routine where there's a door closing? It makes me think of people that relocate or move to a new environment. And maybe they do that because they're trying to get somewhere that has more potential for them spiritually or educationally or something like that, right? New perspectives that cause you to stop old habits. This is like you have some moral epiphany, right? Or something like that. And you're thinking, I do this all the time and I should stop this because it's just not good. So something like that, where you're trying to be in line with your higher principles and you try to cut out a bad habit or something like that. Moral beliefs that come into conflict with people around you, like siblings, the same kind of thing, but maybe this is more like to be in line with those higher philosophical personal principles. Sometimes, when we're standing on principle, we can irritate the people around us, and sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we need to stand on those principles and people are going to be irritated, but it's still important to do that. So this could have something to do with something like that. And some of those people may be siblings. The third house has that connection with siblings. Having to drive a lot further than you used to for business or work or something like that. The ninth house has that connection to longer travel, and the third house has connection to shorter travel. So this could be somebody that's like their boss says all of a sudden, hey, I need you to start commuting out of city or something like that, or I need you to get on a plane and go do this or whatever. So there could be something in your life that you used to have this routine of just going here and there, and it wasn't that far. And now all of a sudden the commute is a lot further. I remember when my partner was in the trades and she was actually working at a nuclear power plant, but it was, I think she told me, well, now I have to drive like way, way further than I usually do for these types of jobs. And so that was a big change. So something like that, maybe moving to a new city, working with domestic abuse in your community. So pulling in that Mars energy about getting together with networks of people that want to defend women, and networking that has a purpose to it, that has like a calling or is trying to focus on a goal. So you meet with people and it's for the benefit of women or something like that, for the defense of domestic abuse or something like that. Maybe there is something that is calling to you more spiritually to do more proactive work that is in the protection or service of women. And that means that you have to stop doing something that you normally do. That's kind of like a routine thing. So it could be something like that as well. We could also have dealing with a broken down car. That's a pretty basic one for an eclipse in the third house. Your car breaks down. Being attacked by friends or siblings, the death of a sibling. Or it could be like, instead of like the death of a sibling, like the actual literal death of a sibling, might be one of those times where you just have like a death moment in the relationship that then will be healed later on. But at the time, it feels like kind of like, ugh, it's like, I'm done with this, I'm over. And it feels kind of like a miniature death. So some kind of death experience with siblings or old friends or people we've known from childhood or neighbors or something like that. Feeling like your environment is making you crazy. This is a full moon after all that is getting eclipsed. So it's a lot of wily energy, and maybe you just feel frizzed out by all of the energy around you at this time, and it's just too much. I could definitely see that with Virgos, because Virgos are pretty sensitive towards mental things, and the moon is very mental at times. So this could be a really emotional, mental time that is just difficult to deal with just in general, that doesn't have anything to do with any particular topic. It's just overwhelming, on the circuit board. So that's what I get for Virgo rising. Let's go ahead and put Libra on the ascendant now. And we're going to take a look at the eclipse now taking place in the second house of money and finances. And the eclipse 2 weeks ago that took place across the 7th and 8th house cusp. The solar eclipse that we look at as maybe a new door opening in this part of the chart, and the lunar eclipse maybe representing a door that is closing in the second house part of the chart. But we're also going to pull in Mars in the 10th house. So what's happening with Mars as the dispositor of the lunar eclipse, of representing some kind of fate or fortune that is happening beyond our control potentially. So if you are a Libra rising here, definitely we're looking at the topics of money and income. So changing into a role where a spouse is the provider, that 8th house eclipse that happened 2 weeks ago, that door that is maybe opening up in the 8th house, sort of sounds like the situation where one partner is able to stay home and the other partner is the main breadwinner and provides for that person, which would fit that second house eclipse, because it's like, well, if you're going to stay home, maybe you quit your job or something like that. So then your money, that door sort of shuts down. So maybe it's like losing income, or it could be losing a position. That fall in Mars in the 10th house could represent a fall of reputation that affects your income somehow. Now, again, this could be through no fault of your own, just a fate or karma. Like, for instance, I had this this job that I did, and the company went out of business. I didn't get fired, or I was I didn't have anything to do with it, right? It just, the company went out, and there went my job, and there went my money from the company. So it could be something like that. Losing money to a step parent or mother. Yeah, so the 10th house is the derived house for the partners of our parents from the 4th. So from a derived house standpoint, sometimes you'll see people like step parents or the partners of your parents maybe having something to do with money, and that is a situation that comes up that needs rescuing, right? And maybe even your partner has to do something to facilitate that as well, since there's an 8th house connection. The culmination of a certain kind of work and money that comes from it. So pretty much more of the same. There could be something that's just finishing up with a certain kind of work that you're doing, and along with it, the money that was derived from it. So all second house kind of centric things you could say here. Okay, let's go ahead and put Scorpio on the ascendant. Now, this is my personal rising sign and my daughter's rising sign. So this moves the eclipse into the first house, the lunar eclipse in the first house. And then we had the solar eclipse 2 weeks ago happen across the 6th house cusp and into the 7th house. And I keep saying that because the eclipse was literally ongoing as it moved across, as the moon moved into the 7th. So it was a really interesting eclipse. But we'll, just for simplicity's sake, we'll say that there was the sun going through an eclipse in the 7th represents maybe a new door that is opening, a new directive that is happening in the 7th house. And the moon represents something that may be closing in the first house, the house of self and body. And we're going to pull in also as well some topics of the 9th house that may be happening alongside some of these other things, or they may all be tied in together. Whatever the situation is, definitely Mars in the 9th house is thematically cropping up right now. And, and this could be informing something that is happening in the first house, because it's the fate or fortune that the moon is going through that is being informed by Mars as the host of the first house. So that's your ascendant ruler, in other words. So the ascendant ruler is in fall in the 9th house. We've had this eclipse in the 7th, and now we're having the door shut in the 1st. What does this all mean potentially? Well, first of all, this definitely is in my opinion, the worst place to have this particular eclipse, because the symbolism is redundant for bodily injury here. You have the moon representing the body, a symbol of the body. You have the first house representing the body. You have all of these things having this connection with Mars, which tends to indicate injuries or accidents related to the body, sometimes involving something like speed. So, you get something potentially here right off the bat. You could say, if you're traveling, do you get hurt while you're traveling, and you get an injury to the body, and that's the eclipse, something like that. And then there are other things that go along with this, but it could be like a relationship that sucks all the life out of you. I sort of feel like this personally, and not in a bad way. Interestingly, I feel like my life, my marriage, what I'm doing for the partnership and the relationship is sort of sucking the life out of me. But I don't say that as a complaint. I say that as a blessing because I feel lucky that I should have to work that hard to have these nice things that I wouldn't not want to have. So I wouldn't not want to be self-sacrificing or burning the energy down to the wick in order to do what I can for my family, my marriage, my relationship. I'm very happy and feel honored that that's the life that I have. So it's not a complaint, but B, that, there is still this signature of just, really being burned down to the core from it, though. It is what it is. Like there's just a feeling of just something closing in the first house. Well, for me, it feels, as a Scorpio rising, it feels like, yeah, I'm just like, I'm just, bringing everything down to as small as I can for me personally. And that's sort of the signature that I get with it. But that's not a complaint because I am very blessed to have the things that I have. So that was meant to almost be just more of a funny one, kind of, but self-sacrifice for marriage, kind of the same theme. Losing a legal case. This is where, you get that eclipse in the seventh house. The seventh house can relate to our competitors, especially in legal battles. So if you have the solar eclipse representing the light that is eclipsed and then comes back, and then it's kind of a new beginning. Could there be a new beginning for a competitor? Looking at it from that standpoint. And then the lunar eclipse is more about fate or fortune. The judge slams the thing down and you lose the case, something like that. So losing a legal case, negotiation, or a competitor, or a competition, sorry. Getting soul sickness from a lack of spiritual life or from overstudying. So Mars informing the first house. What is he saying? Are we studying too much? If you're Scorpio rising, or is there something religiously or spiritually that is going through a difficult time or causing something physical in the body to suffer? So it could be like a soul sickness, right? But it also could be overdoing something, like overdoing a religious study or something like that. Traveling too much if you're a traveler and you're Scorpio rising. Losing faith in who you can be. That's another signification where the ninth house relates to things that we believe. The first house is our image of ourself. So don't lose faith. Mars in its fall in the ninth can wrestle with losses of faith, and it's informing the first house self-beliefs. So got to be careful not to lose faith in who you can be. You can be anything that you want to be, but not if you lose faith. Injury during travel, injury and sickness, resolving a health or emotional issue. So very first house types of things where we're just really probably going to go through something that we can't avoid, that it has something to do with health. So if you're a Scorpio rising, I know you'll get through it because Scorpio risings are incredibly regenerative people. Okay, so let's go ahead now and put Sagittarius on the ascendant. And this is going to move the eclipse into the 12th house. Scorpio in the 12th, we have the solar eclipse that happened 2 weeks ago across the 5th house into the 6th house. And we're also going to pull in the topics of the 8th house. Why? Because Mars is informing the lunar eclipse in the 12th. So we're going to bring in all three of these house topics and see if they're somehow connected or they're just happening alongside each other. There's independent themes that are just all happening at once. Whatever the case is, let's take a look at what they could be here. So if you are Sagittarius rising, released from prison, out on work release. I'm sort of saying this tongue in cheek, where it's like you get these houses that relate to prison, and kind of interesting, when you think about a lunar eclipse as a door that is shutting, the symbol of like click, and then you have the 12th house symbolism of prisons or hospitals. It's like makes you wonder if the door of a prison isn't shutting somehow. But I also wonder if it's not that the door, I also wonder if it isn't the time that you were already imprisoned isn't coming to an end. So the imprisonment sentence is done and complete. In other words, I wonder if that isn't another way of looking at it here. A bail bond kind of situation. Yeah, because we've got Mars in the 8th house. So it's like, just for fun, it's almost like those situations where, well, I guess it's not fun if it happens to you, but as a silly example on my part, I would say rather. This reminds me, like, these house topics being put together is like if you have a friend that's in trouble and or a son or somebody that's in trouble and he calls you and he's calling you from jail and he says, Dad, can you post bail? And there you have Mars in the 8th. It's like, oh, you gotta something fell down in the 8th. There's a resource that you're required to pay for somebody else. It's like a tax or a debt now that you have to borrow, and it's like to get somebody from your family out of jail or hospital or something like that. So hopefully not. Hopefully that isn't like what happens if you're Sagittarius rising for yourself or for anybody you know. But these are kind of just interesting house topics to pair. And then you also bring in that solar eclipse back in the 6th house. You could have, of course, definitely things that have to do with like hospital debt, getting turned down for medical care or medical insurance. That's another thing that may be something. Injuries that bring debt, spending too much money going somewhere to recuperate or to be alone. Now, I know you Sagittarius risings out there, you do love to travel, many of you. So this could be a time where that Mars in the 8th represents borrowing a bunch of money, spending a bunch of money, spending too much money, being too exuberant to go to some place that you really want to go just to be in nature or something like that. Maybe even like you could see a Sag rising wanting to go on an adventure, and this ends up being like they go someplace really beautiful. They're all alone. They're in the wilderness. They're having a great time, but then there's some debt or injury that happens, and there's the eclipse in the 12th. So you got to be careful. I think if you're Sag rising, personal injury could definitely come up here. This could be pushing through an injury to keep working. That opportunity that may represent an open door in the 6th house of work and service. Maybe there's a new opportunity, but it takes a lot of work, and there's something that's not 100% maybe with your body, and you push through it, right? The 12th house is a place of abortions or loss of pregnancy. So we're having a lunar eclipse, and lunar eclipses definitely connect with pregnancy and women and birth and abortion and all of those kinds of pregnancy types of things. Especially the 12th house was said to be the labor before pregnancy. So again, I don't want to, make anybody anxious or make anybody feel worried needlessly, but you could sometimes definitely see issues with pregnancy or abortion or loss of, termination of pregnancy or something like that could definitely be showing up for, unfortunately, some people with signatures like this. So but hopefully not. But okay, getting taken advantage of by somebody like a con man. The 12th house has that connection to people that are working in the shadows, that are like criminal, so gotta watch out for people wanting to take advantage of you and lead you astray almost. Getting away from the demands of your family to have your time. I think that's probably likely what many Sagittarius risings will experience with this eclipse is feeling like there's a door shutting in a psychological area, right? It's something that is kind of in the shadows and something shuts. And I think Sagittarius responds by saying, I need that independent adventure. I need that reset, which I know Sagittarian people often need. They just sometimes need to get that stuff out of their system and be active or adventurous or find some recuperation of spirit, because Sagittarius are very spirited types of people. They need that hope. So an eclipse in the 12th speaks to maybe needing to bring yourself to an isolated place. Likewise, it could also be that you have been doing that and now it's time to come back from the isolated place. A door shutting in an isolated place too. So this one's really interesting, Sagittarius. If you notice anything that's happening around the topics of 12th house, I'd love to hear how this shows up for you. Okay, let's go ahead and put Capricorn on the ascendant here, and we are going to move all of these planets, the eclipse itself, into the 11th house, the last eclipse 2 weeks ago that happened across the 4th into the 5th house. And we're going to pull in Mars here in the 7th because Mars is informing, or the host of the eclipse here in the 11th. So all of these topics may relate to each other, or they may all just be happening thematically alongside of each other. But be that as may, they're definitely showing up as themes. And what could they be if they're alongside or happening in relation to each other? So first of all, the door that closes in the 11th house, what could that represent? Maybe opportunities or resources, networking. The 11th house is a place where we sort of collect opportunities and people we know that want to help us, and just allies and benefactors. So we sort of collect resources and phone numbers. You know, in the old days, it would have been like your Rolodex of people that you would turn to or call. That's sort of the 11th house connection here. So it could be that you lose that Rolodex, or that Rolodex is somehow shut off from you. So you have to be really careful, maybe potentially, about losing people that you network with or have resources with that are usually people that want to help you out. And maybe opportunities are somehow, now again, this is through no fault of your own, so don't beat yourself up about this, but there could just be some bad fate or fortune that comes along and takes an opportunity away that you were really excited about and had like a dream. There's like some dream that dies almost, and you're like, oh man, what am I going to do now? I wanted this so bad. I saw this for myself and I was working on this, but it seems like it's coming to an end somehow. That 11th house quality of goals and dreams and wishes for the future. But also, we're having something happen in the 5th house. We had that solar eclipse come down across the 4th into the 5th house access there, and that could be a new child or a new way of having fun, a new way of being creative or being recreational after work or something like that. So makes me wonder if at the same time that there are opportunities that may be phasing or fizzling out or shutting altogether, there's something fun and pleasurable and joyful about our lives as well happening in the 1st. Now, maybe that's the birth of a new child or something like that. Losing the friends of your ex. So now we pull in Mars in the 7th. Sometimes, you know, if you get out of a relationship and you had common friends, sometimes you don't have those same friends anymore. So maybe something about the relationship is informing the fate of the friends in the 11th, and there's like a loss of friends somehow. Maybe it has something to do with the relationship. Maybe you're no longer in the relationship or something like that. Relationship issues that change friendships, you know, something similar to that. Loss or hopes of dreams because of misfortune in a relationship. So how are relationships connecting to networks of friends or people that you share together? Is there something about that may be shifting or changing in a way that's really has nothing to do with anything you're doing? It's just a sort of fate or fortune that comes through and sort of brings things to an end, so to speak. So an example of this could be like a partner that needs to relocate for work, and now you lose your friends or something like that you've always had. Changing the kinds of people you associate with. Definitely an eclipse in the 11th speaks to, in the coming future, there being, you know, all of a sudden a space where you look back and say, I don't even hang out with those people anymore. It's done. I'm around new people now. I think that is probably something that, if you're Capricorn Rising, you know, is pretty likely to be the case. Losing the help of a benefactor. Kind of the same theme, but it's like somebody that wants to help you out that can't help you out anymore, and that bridge is either burnt or it's just through no fault of your own. Again, fate or fortune comes along, and it's like maybe you had, you know, a boss or something that you really looked up to, and he was always gunning for you or something like that, and he retires or changes jobs or something like that. It's like, it's nothing to do with you. It's just all of a sudden you don't have that ally anymore. So there's something about allies that seems like a door that's shutting on a kind of ally or a kind of hope or a dream or something like that. It may have something to do with children. Maybe there's a newborn that changes your social life or something like that. You're not hanging out with the friends because you're spending time with the children more. Something like that for Capricorn Rising, I would think. Okay, now let's go ahead and put Aquarius on the ascendant here. And this is going to bring these planets into the 10th house for the lunar eclipse in Scorpio. 2 weeks ago, we had the solar eclipse happen across the 3rd house, 4th house cusp here into the 4th house. And we're going to pull in Mars in its fall in Cancer in the 6th. So these topics might be related to each other, or they might thematically be happening side by side of each other. But we're pulling in Mars because Mars is is informing the fate or karma that is happening to the 10th. And we could look at this as maybe something new, a new door that is opening up, being represented by the sun down here in the 4th house, and maybe a door that's closing by the moon in the 10th house. So, right off the bat, this seems like something that is beginning at home or in the family, something that's has new life down there. So it could be a new family member. It could be the visiting of a relative. It could be the buying of a new property or building a new house or anything like that. And it seems like there's something in the 10th that closes down, a door shuts. So this could be a fall from a position at work, retiring, going through a fall of reputational status. Like, for instance, if you get divorced and you no longer are known in the public as somebody's wife or spouse. Sometimes that happens too. A child that goes off to college and somehow your status changes as a parent. So status change around parent, relationship, marital status, career or job status, something is shifting around there. Or maybe it could be an activity that you always do, that you're engaged in, that somehow comes to an end at this moment. Maybe it has something to do with service that needs to be done by this fallen Mars in the 6th. Maybe there's an injury, hopefully not, and you end up staying home more. But there's something that is probably pulling you out of the public sphere into the home sphere. That's really what I get from that for Aquarius Rising. My son, my 8-year-old son, he's an Aquarius Rising, and I was thinking, what could this be for him? He just goes to school, And I was talking with Kate about this, and I was like, I wonder if it seems like he's kind of been dealing with bullies from time to time, although it has stopped now. But I wonder if it's almost like a bully kind of situation, where it's like somebody does something while he's at school and it's public and it's embarrassing or something like that. So hopefully not. If it does, I will go take care of it like I did the last time. But yeah, I sort of wonder how these things play out, right? Something in the public sphere that falls, probably through no fate of your own. So like, for instance, if it's my son, he's probably just doing nothing. Maybe he's just in the cafeteria, just eating lunch, and somebody messes with him or something like that. And then there's like a fall of reputation or something like that, but it's through no fault of his own. So again, this could be a work situation that comes to an end. Like I worked for a company, and the company went out of business, and there went the money. And where was I? I was back at home. So there was a new direction of my life that was really more homebound for a while. So that's what I get for if you are Aquarius Rising. Now we're going to go ahead and put Pisces on the ascendant here, and this is going to move the eclipse into the 9th house. This one really, really interesting. And then 2 weeks ago, there was a solar eclipse in the 3rd house. So we're looking at this from the symbolism or theme of saying what was beginning in the 3rd house, like a door opening, and what is closing, what kind of door is closing in the 9th house. We're also going to pull in Mars and the 5th house topics that may be informing the fate or fortune of the fallen moon here. So the topic of children, the topic of siblings or everyday environment or rituals or the places that you always inhabit, the day-to-day environment, and also the 9th house, a place that was called God. So what could this be if you are Pisces Rising? This makes me wonder if, first of all, there isn't this could be somebody that moves to a new city or just moves. So their everyday environment is new. There's something new. There's a new door opening in the everyday environment. There's a place that you didn't you weren't going before and now you are, or something like that. There's some kind of new purpose that you have day to day. So you're doing something that you weren't doing before day to day that's becoming a routine now. And this might change a door to shut in the ninth house. So for instance, this could be somebody that renounces a faith, or, walks away from a religion, or graduates from their higher educational studies, or returns home after travel. Or like, for instance, my wife, Kate, she lives far away from her family. So this could be a time where, like, she was Pisces rising, maybe she's thinking about going to visit her family. So there's a door shutting in the place that she is far away from her family. So maybe this could be, if for some Pisces risings, that you end up relocating closer to family, or some cousins or something like that, some third house kinds of relatives. So maybe not direct family, but family members that are like cousins or uncles or aunts, grandparents. This could be a move back to something like that. But yeah, you get the sense that there are ninth house things that are coming to an end, which might be, again, the completion of education programs, the death of a belief paradigm, or renunciation of faith or religion, maybe that's coming to an end, the ending of a divinatory practice. So for me, like, if I was going to give up astrology, could a Pisces rising out there have been an astrologer for a while and decided that they wanted to take a break on that? Separation from dogma. This could also be a thing. This could be where Pisces rising is thinking to themselves, wherever there is dogma in my life, whether it's coming from me or from another circumstance, I just don't want it or need it. And that tension from the dogma, maybe something happens, and even though it's not, you didn't do anything to cause it, there's that door shuts, and all of a sudden it's like boom, you're locked out. And maybe it's a good thing, because you don't have to deal with that kind of dogma system anymore. And okay, so moving back home, and the end of legal matters is something that we could see here, because this is, the ninth house is also related to sometimes legal matters. So maybe this could be the end of a legal matter. It's more likely to be the end of somebody that's studying for the bar or something like that. But in any case, that is what I have for all 12 rising signs. So I hope you enjoyed this and maybe got something good out of this. Now, you can always leave me a comment in the comment section. Just tell me your rising sign. If you notice anything that is coming through or seem to resonate with you, I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about that or experiencing. And I'll be back again for another astrology video. This eclipse is pretty powerful, but there is also a pretty good transit coming up at the about 7 days after the eclipse that seems to really help smooth out maybe some of the rougher energies of this particular event that happens. Hang in there if anybody has anything rough happen with the eclipse, because I think there is something good on the way that is going to help it out. All right, take care of everybody and stay safe. Bye for now.